Jake Morrison pressed his face against the cold metal window of his ship and watched the alien station spinning slowly in the darkness ahead. The massive structure looked like a crystal flower made of steel and glass, beautiful and deadly at the same time. His hands moved across the control panel without making a sound as he guided his small ship closer to the asteroid field that surrounded the station. Behind him, Lisa Barnes checked the recording equipment for the third time in an hour. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the translation devices that would help them understand what the aliens were saying. She had been training for this mission her entire life, but now that they were actually here, watching the beings who ruled the galaxy, fear crept up her spine like ice water. Alex Rodriguez sat in the corner, studying the biological readings from the alien ships that moved around the station like metal fish swimming through space. Each species was different, and he had spent years learning to recognize their various forms and technologies. The tall, thin creatures with 4 arms were Catherians, the rulers of the Eastern Galaxy. The round, floating beings covered in purple fur were Zalonians, who controlled the mining operations on 1,000 worlds. Morrison had been leading reconnaissance missions for 15 years, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of so many alien ships gathered in one place. His grandfather had told him stories about the old days when humans lived on Earth and sent radio signals into space, hoping someone would answer. Someone had answered, but not in the way humans had expected. The plague had come without warning, 800 years ago. It killed 9 out of every 10 humans on Earth and made the planet unlivable. The survivors had no choice but to leave everything behind and flee into the darkness between galaxies. For 8 centuries, humans had lived in secret, building ships and weapons, waiting for the day they could return home. The alien station grew larger as Morrison's ship drifted closer. He could see thousands of windows glowing with strange colored lights and massive docking bays where ships from dozens of different worlds came and went like busy insects. This was Zentara Prime, the capital of what the aliens called the Galactic Commonwealth, a government that ruled over every inhabited world in the galaxy. Through his earpiece, Morrison heard the voice of Admiral Kate Sullivan, the commander of the human fleet that waited in the cold void between galaxies. Her words were carefully chosen and quiet, because even though they were using quantum encryption that no alien technology could break, everyone was afraid of being discovered. Morrison activated his transmitter and spoke in a whisper. "This is Recon Team Alpha. We are in position around the target station. Beginning surveillance operations now." Sullivan's voice crackled back through the static. "Copy that, Morrison. Remember, observe only. We need to know what we're dealing with before we make any decisions about contact." The team had been watching alien communications for months, learning their languages and studying their behavior. What they had discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The aliens believed that humans were extinct, wiped out by the same plague that had forced them to flee Earth. Archaeological expeditions to the Sol system had found only empty cities and silent radio towers, confirming what the aliens already believed. Lisa's translation equipment came to life as alien voices filled the ship's communication system. The beings on the station were holding some kind of meeting, and their words painted a picture of a galaxy divided among 12 major species. Each group controlled their own territory, and they had spent the last 1,000 years fighting over resources and trade routes. Chancellor Vex Tar, the leader of the Catherian Empire, was speaking to the assembled representatives. His voice was deep and musical, like wind blowing through metal tubes. "The Outer Rim territories continue to provide adequate resources for our expansion programs," he said. "The primitive species in those regions require minimal oversight and pose no threat to our operations." Alex Rodriguez felt sick as he listened to the translation. The aliens spoke about other intelligent species like they were farm animals, useful only for the work they could perform and the resources they could provide. Entire civilizations had been reduced to slave labor and their worlds had been strip-mined for metals and minerals. Morrison's jaw tightened as he heard more details about the alien empire. The Commonwealth had divided the galaxy into zones, with each major species controlling certain sectors. Smaller, weaker civilizations were either enslaved or eliminated entirely. Worlds that resisted were bombarded from orbit until nothing remained but ash and broken stone. For 3 days, the human team remained hidden among the asteroids, recording everything they could see and hear. They watched as alien ships arrived from across the galaxy, bringing reports of successful mining operations, conquered worlds, and populations relocated to labor camps. The Commonwealth had created a system of oppression that stretched across 1 million star systems. When Chancellor Vextar mentioned humans during one of his speeches, the team held their breath. The human species showed some potential for technological development, he said casually. However, the stellar plague that consumed their system several centuries ago ended any possibility of their advancement. Archaeological evidence confirms total extinction. Lisa Barnes looked at Morrison with tears in her eyes. The aliens had no idea that humanity had survived, grown stronger, and spent 8 centuries preparing for this moment. They believed the galaxy belonged to them, and they ruled it with cruelty and indifference. Morrison keyed his transmitter one last time. Admiral, we have confirmed intelligence. The aliens believe we are extinct. They have no knowledge of our survival or current capabilities. Recommend we proceed to Phase 2. Sullivan's voice carried relief and determination. Understood, Morrison. Continue observation protocols. We need complete intelligence before we decide how to announce our return. 3 months had passed since Jake Morrison's team first watched the aliens at Zentara Prime, and now Eric Stone found himself deep in Commonwealth territory, leading a different kind of mission. His ship, the Nightfall, was painted black as space itself and equipped with technology that made it invisible to alien sensors. Stone had spent weeks moving through star systems controlled by the Commonwealth, placing tiny monitoring devices on asteroids and abandoned space stations. The information these devices collected was sent back to the human fleet through quantum, transmitters that worked faster than light. Each day brought new intelligence about alien military strength, political structure, and the true extent of their empire. What the humans discovered made them realize that the galaxy had become a much darker place than they had ever imagined. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the command center of the massive human ship called Endeavor, studying holographic displays that showed star maps and fleet positions across the galaxy. The ship was 10 miles long and carried enough weapons to destroy planets, but it remained hidden in the empty space between galaxies, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Ryan Phillips, Sullivan's tactical officer, pointed to red markers scattered across the star map like drops of blood. Each marker represented a world where the Commonwealth had committed what humans could only call genocide. The pacification zones are the worst, Phillips explained. When a species refuses to surrender their independence, the Commonwealth simply eliminates them entirely. Amanda Carter, the fleet's chief strategist, had spent her entire career studying alien military tactics and political systems. She stood next to Phillips, her face pale as she explained what their intelligence teams had discovered. 43 star systems have been completely depopulated in the last 200 years. The Commonwealth calls it biological restructuring, but the reality is systematic murder on a scale we can barely comprehend. The holographic display showed detailed information about each destroyed civilization. The Morvani had been a peaceful species of plant-like beings who lived in harmony with their forest worlds. When they refused to allow Commonwealth mining operations to destroy their sacred groves, Zolonian warships had burned their planets from orbit. The Kethri were aquatic creatures who had developed beautiful underwater cities. They had been eliminated because their worlds contained rare minerals needed for alien technology. Sullivan felt anger building in her chest as she studied the data. Humanity had fled Earth hoping to find a galaxy full of diverse civilizations living together in peace. Instead, They had discovered an empire built on cruelty and oppression that made the worst human dictators look like children playing with toys. Ben Parker, the intelligence chief, activated another section of the star map that showed Commonwealth military positions. Their fleet strength is distributed across 12 major sectors, with heavy concentrations around resource-rich systems. Total estimate is approximately 50,000 combat vessels of various sizes. The numbers were staggering, but what worried the human commanders more was the casual way the Commonwealth used overwhelming force against anyone who opposed them. Alien military doctrine was simple and brutal. Destroy any threat completely and quickly before it could grow strong enough. To cause real problems, Carter highlighted a cluster of yellow markers on the display. These represent species that still maintain some level of independence. The Commonwealth calls them provisional members, which means they provide resources and labor in exchange for protection from other threats. The most promising potential. Allie was a species called the Andrathi, amphibious humanoids who lived on ocean worlds and had developed impressive biotechnology. Their home system was heavily defended, but intelligence reports suggested they maintained secret resistance networks throughout their territory. Stone's voice crackled through the communication system as his ship transmitted new intelligence from deep in Commonwealth space. This is Nightfall Team. We have confirmed visual surveillance of a Zolonian fleet exercise in the Kappa sector. Counted over 300 vessels engaged in orbital bombardment practice against simulated planetary targets. The transmission included video recordings that showed alien ships methodically destroying artificial targets designed to look like cities and industrial centers. The exercise was clearly preparation for eliminating any world that dared to resist. Commonwealth Authority. Sullivan studied the footage with growing determination. For 800 years, humans had survived in the cold darkness between galaxies, building their strength and preparing for the day they could return home. They had developed technology that the Commonwealth had never seen, weapons that could strike without warning, and ships that could appear and disappear like ghosts. Phillips brought up tactical analyses that showed Commonwealth weaknesses. Their command structure is highly centralized, with all major decisions made by the Council on Zentara Prime. If we could disrupt their communications network, individual fleet commanders would be unable to coordinate effective responses to simultaneous attacks. Carter nodded in agreement. They've never faced an enemy capable of striking multiple targets at once. Their entire military strategy is based on concentrating overwhelming force against single threats. The human fleet had been designed specifically to exploit these weaknesses. Instead of building massive ships that could be easily detected and targeted, humans had created smaller vessels that could work together like a pack of wolves. Each ship was equipped with quantum stealth technology that made it invisible to Commonwealth sensors until the moment it attacked. Sullivan made her decision. Begin Phase 2 operations. I want intelligence teams inserted into Commonwealth territory, with orders to make contact with resistance groups. But remember, we reveal nothing about our true capabilities until we understand exactly what we're dealing with. The orders went out through quantum transmitters to human teams scattered across the galaxy. Captain Nancy Cole received instructions to approach the Andrathi homeworld disguised as a traitor from the Outer Rim territories. Marcus Bell's cyber warfare specialists began their attempts to infiltrate Commonwealth computer networks. Sarah Mitchell prepared her Marine units for possible ground operations on occupied worlds. As the human fleet prepared for more aggressive operations, Admiral Sullivan looked out at the stars that had once been humanity's home. The aliens had ruled this galaxy for 1,000 years, believing themselves the only advanced species capable of civilization. They had divided the stars among themselves like pieces of property, enslaving or destroying anyone who stood in their way. But they had made one critical mistake. They had assumed that humanity was extinct, unable to pose any threat to their empire. Soon they would learn that reports of humanity's death had been greatly exaggerated. The Commonwealth controlled the galaxy through fear and overwhelming force, but humans had learned something during their long exile that the aliens had forgotten. They had learned patience, cooperation, and the value of freedom. Most importantly, they had learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from being underestimated by your enemies. The war for the galaxy was about to begin, and the aliens had no idea what was coming for them. Nancy Cole felt sweat running down her back as her disguised ship approached the beautiful blue-green world of Aquanus, home planet of the Andrathi Republic. Her vessel looked like a typical merchant trader from the Outer Rim territories, complete, with fake registration documents and a cargo hold filled with common trade goods. Tyler Ross sat beside her at the navigation station, monitoring alien scanning systems to make sure their advanced human technology remained hidden beneath layers of ordinary-looking equipment. The Andrathi spaceport was unlike anything humans had ever built. Instead of metal and concrete, the aliens had grown their docking facilities from living coral that adapted to accommodate ships of different sizes and shapes. Massive organic structures twisted up from the ocean floor like underwater mountains, their surfaces covered with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with soft blue and green light. As Cole's ship settled into a docking cradle that molded itself around the hull, she tried to calm her racing heart. This was the first time in 800 years that humans would make direct contact with an alien species, and everything depended on convincing the Andrathi that she was exactly what she appeared to be, a simple trader looking for new business opportunities. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and Cole found herself face to face with an Andrathi official whose skin shimmered with scales that changed color based on his emotions. Gill slits along his neck fluttered nervously as he looked at Cole and Ross with large, dark eyes that seemed to see everything. Tholvar, the harbor guide, spoke in accented standard Galactic, the common language used for trade throughout the Commonwealth. Welcome to Aquanus, travelers. Your ship's registration indicates you represent something called the Outer Rim Collective. We have no records of this organization in our trade databases. Cole smiled and handed him a datapad containing carefully forged documents that human intelligence had spent months creating. The collective has been operating quietly in the frontier systems for several years. We prefer to establish relationships slowly, with worlds that value independence and fair trade. The phrase, value independence, was a carefully chosen signal that human intelligence hoped would reach the right ears. According to intercepted communications, Andrathi resistance groups used similar language to identify potential allies and sympathizers. Tholvar's scales shifted to a deeper blue color as he studied the trade documents. Independence is an interesting concept in these times. The Commonwealth provides stability and protection, but some worlds find the costs of membership to be quite high. Ross stepped forward and activated a small device that looked like a standard trade computer but was actually scanning for electronic surveillance equipment. The readouts showed they were being monitored by Commonwealth security systems, which meant they would need to be very careful about what they said and did. For the next several hours, Cole and Ross played their parts perfectly, visiting Andrathi, merchants, and discussing possible trade agreements for rare metals and biotechnology. They toured the underwater city districts, marveling at the organic architecture and the way the Andrathi had learned to live in harmony with their ocean environment. As evening approached, Tholvar approached them with what appeared to be a routine invitation to dinner at a local restaurant. But the location, he suggested, was in the deep water districts, far from the commercial areas where Commonwealth monitors were most likely to be listening. The restaurant was built inside a massive coral formation 3 miles beneath the surface of the ocean. Cole and Ross were given breathing apparatus that allowed them to survive in the water-filled environment, and they followed Tholvar through tunnels that glowed with natural phosphorescence. At a table in the deepest part of the restaurant, 3 Andrathi were waiting for them. The bioluminescent patterns on their skin indicated they held high positions in Andrathi society, but there was something else about them that made Cole's instincts alert. These were not ordinary citizens. The leader of the group introduced himself, simply as current rider, which Cole's translation device indicated was probably a code name rather than a real identifier. His large eyes studied Cole and Ross with obvious suspicion as he spoke in careful, measured tones. Harbor Guide Tholvar tells us you represent traders interested in independence. This is a dangerous concept to discuss openly in our current political climate. Perhaps you could explain why beings from unknown territories would risk Commonwealth attention by promoting such ideas. Cole looked at Ross and made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Because we are not traders, and we do not come from unknown territories. We represent a species that the Commonwealth believes is extinct. We have returned to find our galaxy enslaved, and we want to help you regain your freedom. The silence that followed was so complete that Cole could hear the gentle movement of water through the coral tunnels around them. The three Andrathi stared at her with expressions of shock and disbelief, their bioluminescent patterns flickering rapidly as they processed what she had just revealed. Current Rider was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. You claim to represent the humans, but archaeological evidence from the Sol system confirms total extinction centuries ago. The Commonwealth's greatest scientists have verified this data multiple times. Ross reached into his equipment pack and retrieved a small crystalline device that contained terabytes of information. The Commonwealth found what we wanted them to find. Humanity did not die on Earth. We fled into the darkness between galaxies and spent 8 centuries preparing for our return. The crystal contained historical records, genetic samples, technological specifications, and cultural artifacts that only humans could possess. It also included detailed intelligence about Commonwealth military positions and political structure that the Andrathi resistance had been trying to gather for decades. As Current Rider studied the data, his scales slowly shifted to colors that Cole's translation device indicated meant amazement and hope. The other Andrathi leaned forward eagerly, their own patterns beginning to pulse with excitement as they realized what this information meant. If this data is accurate, Current Rider said slowly, then you possess military intelligence that could change the balance of power in dozens of star systems. The resistance networks have been working separately for generations, believing we faced an impossible task. But if humanity has truly returned with the capabilities this data suggests, Cole nodded firmly. We have been watching the Commonwealth for months. We know about the pacification zones, the slave worlds, and the systematic elimination of independent species. We did not survive 800 years in exile just to watch the galaxy burn under tyranny. The alliance between humanity and the Andrathi resistance was formalized in that underwater chamber, with representatives of 2 species joining together against an empire that had oppressed the galaxy for 1,000 years. Current Rider provided Cole with contact information for resistance cells in 17 different star systems, along with detailed intelligence about Commonwealth weaknesses that could be exploited. As Cole and Ross prepared to leave Aquanis, they carried with them more than just intelligence data. They carried hope, something that had been rare in the galaxy for far too long. The Commonwealth had ruled through fear and overwhelming force, but they had never faced an enemy that combined advanced technology with the desperate courage of beings fighting for their freedom. The message that Cole transmitted to Admiral Sullivan was brief but carried enormous implications. First contact successful, alliance established. Resistance networks are larger and more organized than we believed. Proceeding to Phase 3. Admiral Kreshitar of the Zolonian Fourth Fleet stood before a massive tactical display in his command center, watching red warning indicators flash across star maps that covered 17 different sectors of Commonwealth space. The Zolonian commander's purple fur bristled with frustration as his intelligence officers reported a series of impossible incidents that had begun occurring throughout the galaxy. Lieutenant Commander Vothra, his chief of intelligence, floated beside the display using the anti-gravity technology that allowed his species to move freely in 3 dimensions. The pattern analysis is conclusive, Admiral. Equipment failures, communication disruptions, and supply chain problems are occurring simultaneously across multiple sectors. The precision suggests external coordination rather than random mechanical failures. Kreshtar's four arms gestured angrily at the display as more reports arrived from Commonwealth installations throughout the galaxy. Mining operations on Kepler-7 had lost all communication with orbital control stations. Transport ships carrying crucial supplies had experienced navigation system failures that left them stranded in empty space. Most disturbing of all, several Commonwealth military bases had reported that their defensive systems had shut down for brief periods before mysteriously reactivating. What the Zolonian commander did not know was that Marcus Bell and his team of human cyber warfare specialists had been systematically infiltrating Commonwealth computer networks for months. Working from a hidden base ship called Victory, Bell's hackers used quantum computers that operated on principles the aliens had never discovered, allowing them to slip through Commonwealth security systems like ghosts moving through walls. Bell sat in front of a curved display that showed the internal structure of Commonwealth data networks. His fingers moved across holographic controls as he guided software programs designed to learn and adapt to alien computer systems. Each successful infiltration gave the humans access to more classified information, including fleet deployment, schedules, supply manifests, and communication protocols. The human cyber warfare program had three main objectives: gather intelligence about Commonwealth military capabilities, identify weaknesses in their command structure, and prepare the groundwork for coordinated strikes against critical infrastructure. Bell's team had already gained access to navigation systems for over 3,000 Commonwealth vessels, giving them the ability to disable or misdirect alien ships at crucial moments. On the massive human command ship Endeavor, Admiral Kate Sullivan reviewed the results of 6 months of covert operations with her senior staff. The conference room was filled with holographic displays showing intelligence data gathered from across the galaxy, including detailed information about Commonwealth military strength, political divisions, and the growing resistance movements on occupied worlds. Ben Parker, now promoted to colonel, highlighted key points on the strategic display as he briefed the assembled officers. Resistance networks have been established in 41 star systems, with active cells on 87 inhabited worlds. The Andrathi have provided contact information for liberation groups representing 15 different species. Amanda Carter stood beside the display, pointing to sectors of space where human infiltration teams had identified critical vulnerabilities in Commonwealth infrastructure. Their centralized command structure creates multiple single points of failure. Communication, networks, supply lines, and military coordination all depend on systems we can now access and control. Ryan Phillips, the tactical officer, brought up detailed analyses of Commonwealth fleet positions and defensive capabilities. Their military doctrine assumes technological superiority and overwhelming numerical advantage. They have never developed tactics for fighting an enemy capable of coordinating simultaneous strikes across multiple sectors. The intelligence gathered by human reconnaissance teams painted a picture of an empire that had grown complacent after 1,000 years of unchallenged dominance. Commonwealth military commanders had spent centuries fighting rebellions by primitive species using simple weapons and basic tactics. They had no experience dealing with an opponent that possessed advanced stealth technology, quantum computing, capabilities, and most importantly, strategic patience developed through 8 centuries of survival in the void. Sullivan studied the tactical projections with growing confidence. What about our stealth capabilities? Have the aliens shown any ability to detect our ships or technology? Eric Stone, recently promoted to Commodore after his successful deep reconnaissance missions, answered with a slight smile. Our quantum stealth systems continue to operate perfectly. Commonwealth sensors are designed to detect ships using conventional propulsion and energy signatures. Our technology is simply invisible to their detection methods. The human fleet had been designed specifically to exploit Commonwealth weaknesses discovered through months of careful observation. Instead of building massive battleships that could be easily tracked and targeted, humans had created smaller vessels that could appear and disappear without warning, striking with precision before vanishing back into the darkness of space. Carter activated another section of the display that showed the locations of Commonwealth political and military leadership. Phase 3 will require simultaneous strikes against 17 major command centers, 43 supply depots, and over 200 communication relay stations. The coordination window is extremely narrow, but if executed properly, it will effectively blind and paralyze Commonwealth forces throughout the galaxy. The plan was elegant in its complexity and devastating in its potential impact. Human cyber warfare teams would disable Commonwealth communication networks at the precise moment that stealth ships attacked critical installations. Resistance groups on occupied worlds would coordinate uprisings to prevent Commonwealth forces from regrouping. Most importantly, the attacks would occur simultaneously across such a wide area that alien commanders would be unable to respond effectively to any single threat. Phillips brought up tactical simulations that showed the expected Commonwealth response to the coordinated attacks. Their standard doctrine calls for concentrating all available forces to eliminate the most dangerous threat first. However, our strikes will create dozens of equally critical emergencies across multiple sectors. They will be forced to divide their forces, which negates their numerical advantage. Sullivan looked around the conference room at officers who had spent their entire lives preparing for this moment. There is one thing we must remember. Once we reveal ourselves, there will be no possibility of retreat or negotiation. The Commonwealth will respond with everything they have. Stone stepped forward, his expression serious but determined. Let them come, Admiral. They have ruled through fear and oppression for 1,000 years. It is time they learned what fear truly means. The human fleet had been built not just for war, but for liberation. Every ship carried medical supplies, food, and reconstruction equipment that would be needed to help freed worlds rebuild after Commonwealth occupation. Human engineers had spent decades developing technology that could repair damaged ecosystems and restore worlds that had been strip-mined or bombed into wasteland. Colonel Parker activated the final section of the briefing, showing deployment, schedules for human forces throughout the galaxy. All infiltration teams are in position. Resistance networks have received final coordination instructions through quantum transmitters. Cyber warfare systems are ready to execute simultaneous network infiltration across 17 sectors. Sullivan stood and looked out through the command center's massive windows at the human fleet waiting in the darkness. Hundreds of ships floated in perfect formation, their crews ready to begin the most important mission in human history. For 8 centuries, humanity had dreamed of returning home to find a galaxy at peace. Instead, they had discovered an empire built on cruelty and oppression. But they had also found something else, the strength and determination to fight for freedom, not just for themselves, but for every species that had suffered under Commonwealth rule. The galaxy belonged to everyone who called it home, and humanity would make sure it stayed that way. The human fleet materialized from quantum stealth in 12 Commonwealth core systems at exactly the same moment, their ships appearing like ghosts, becoming solid in the darkness of space. For the first time in a millennium, alien sensors detected vessels of completely unknown configuration emerging from what appeared to be empty space. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of the Endeavor as her flagship decloaked directly above Zentara Prime, the capital world of the Galactic Commonwealth. Around her massive ship, 73 human vessels arranged themselves in perfect attack formation, their hulls bearing symbols of a species the galaxy believed had died centuries ago. The Commonwealth's greatest leaders were meeting in emergency session when the impossible happened. Chancellor Vextar was addressing the Galactic Council about routine territorial disputes when his aide burst into the chamber with reports that sent shockwaves through the assembly. Unknown ships had appeared simultaneously in every major Commonwealth system, and they were broadcasting messages in languages that should not exist. Sullivan activated her communication system and transmitted on all frequencies throughout Commonwealth space. Her voice carried across the galaxy with words that would be remembered for generations. This is Admiral Kate Sullivan of the Human Expeditionary Fleet to all Commonwealth vessels and installations. We are the species you call extinct. We have returned to find our galaxy enslaved. This ends now. The response was immediate chaos. Commonwealth commanders who had never faced an unknown enemy struggled to understand tactical situations they had never encountered. Alien ships that had dominated space for 1,000 years suddenly seemed small and vulnerable compared to the sleek human vessels that moved with impossible speed and precision. On Aquanis, Current Rider and his Andrathi resistance fighters emerged from their underwater hiding places as human marines led by Colonel Sarah Mitchell provided cover and support. The bioluminescent patterns of celebration had not been seen on the Andrathi homeworld for 3 generations as Commonwealth occupation forces found themselves surrounded and outgunned. Marcus Bell's cyber warfare teams executed the final phase of their infiltration program, taking complete control of Commonwealth communication networks. Suddenly, every occupied world in the galaxy received the same message transmitted in hundreds of different languages. The Commonwealth's reign of terror is ending. Help is here. Rise up and reclaim your freedom. Admiral Kreshtar aboard his Zolonian command ship tried desperately to coordinate a response as his fleet found itself facing human vessels that appeared and disappeared like hunting predators. The purple-furred commander's 4 arms moved frantically across his control panels as he attempted to target ships that his sensors could barely detect. All units, concentrate fire on the lead vessel, Kreshtar ordered, but his weapons found only empty space where human ships had been moments before. The aliens had spent centuries fighting opponents who announced their attacks with massive fleet movements and orbital bombardments. They had no tactics for dealing with enemies who struck without warning and vanished before retaliation was possible. Eric Stone, now commanding the human Third Fleet, accepted the surrender of Catherian home defense forces after a battle that lasted only 6 hours. The elegant alien ships with their crystalline hulls and energy weapons were no match for human vessels that could phase in and out of normal space, striking with weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics. The battle for Zentara Prime became the symbol of human return to the galaxy. Commonwealth defenders had expected to face primitive rebels with simple weapons, not an advanced military force that used technology beyond their understanding. Human ships moved through the alien fleet like sharks through a school of fish, disabling vessels with precise strikes that left crews alive but helpless. Chancellor Vextar watched from his command center as his empire crumbled around him. Reports flooded in from across Commonwealth space telling the same impossible story. Human fleets were appearing everywhere at once, their ships immune to alien weapons and their crews working in perfect coordination with resistance groups that had been planning for this moment for generations. The Kelvani mining collectives on 16 different worlds shut down their operations and declared independence. The Theran agricultural planet stopped sending food shipments to Commonwealth military bases. Most shocking of all, even some species within the Commonwealth's own bureaucracy began openly supporting the human liberation forces. Tyler Ross, now commanding a human destroyer squadron, led attacks against Commonwealth supply depots in the Outer Rim territories. His ships moved through the alien positions like lightning, destroying military installations while carefully avoiding civilian targets. The humans had not returned to the galaxy to become conquerors, but to serve as liberators who would help other species reclaim their freedom. Amanda Carter coordinated the overall strategic campaign from her position aboard the Victory, watching as tactical displays showed Commonwealth resistance collapsing throughout the galaxy. The aliens had built their empire on the assumption that no force could challenge their technological and numerical superiority. They had been wrong about everything. Ben Parker's intelligence networks provided real-time information about Commonwealth troop movements and political developments. Alien commanders found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to know their plans before they made them, striking at weak points with perfect timing and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. The Commonwealth's centralized command structure, which had been a source of strength for 1,000 years, became a fatal weakness when human cyber warfare teams gained control of their communication systems. Orders from Zentara Prime never reached outlying garrisons, and local commanders were left to make decisions without coordination or support. On world after world, the pattern was the same. Human ships would appear without warning, disable Commonwealth defenses, and then provide support for local resistance groups that emerged from hiding with weapons and plans they had been preparing for generations. The liberation of the galaxy was not accomplished by human force alone, but by the combined efforts of dozens of species working together toward a common goal. Admiral Sullivan stood on her bridge and watched as the last Commonwealth stronghold on Zentara Prime lowered its defensive shields in surrender. The battle for the galaxy had not been won in a single day, but the outcome had never been truly in doubt. The Commonwealth had ruled through fear and oppression, but they had never planned for an enemy that combined advanced technology with the desperate courage of beings fighting for their freedom. As news of human victory spread throughout the galaxy, entire sectors rose in rebellion against their former oppressors. The Commonwealth's empire, built on a foundation of fear and tyranny, crumbled as subject peoples realized they had allies willing to fight and die for the cause of liberation. Jake Morrison, the reconnaissance specialist who had first observed the aliens at Zentara Prime, found himself accepting the surrender of the same Chancellor Vextar, whose speeches he had recorded months before. The Catherian leader's elegant form was bent with defeat as he formally dissolved the Galactic Commonwealth and agreed to participate in the formation of a new democratic government. The galaxy belonged to everyone now, and humanity would make sure it stayed that way. The surrender of Chancellor Vextar marked the end of the Commonwealth's 1,000-year reign, but for Admiral Kate Sullivan and her human fleet, the real work was just beginning. The galaxy was free, but freedom came with responsibilities that no one had fully prepared for. Across hundreds of star systems, former slave worlds struggled to govern themselves after generations of oppression, while Commonwealth loyalists retreated to fortified positions and planned counterattacks. Sullivan stood in the converted council chambers of Zentara Prime, now serving as temporary headquarters for what was being called the Liberation Government. Representatives from 47 different species had gathered to discuss the future of galactic civilization, and the debates were often heated and chaotic. Species that had been enemies for centuries now had to find ways to work together, while others who had never met faced the challenge of communicating across vastly different cultures and value systems. Current rider of the Andrathi had become one of the most influential voices in the new government, his bioluminescent patterns flashing with excitement as he addressed the assembly. "The humans have given us something precious beyond measure," he said, his words translated into dozens of languages simultaneously. "They have given us the chance to determine our own destiny. But freedom without responsibility becomes anarchy, and anarchy serves only our former oppressors." The challenges facing the new galactic government were enormous. The Commonwealth had deliberately kept subject species dependent on centralized systems for everything from food distribution to medical care. When those systems collapsed, millions of beings found themselves without basic necessities. Human supply ships worked around the clock to deliver emergency aid, but the scale of the crisis was beyond anything a single species could handle alone. Marcus Bell had transitioned from cyber warfare to infrastructure reconstruction, leading teams of human engineers and alien specialists in rebuilding communication networks that could serve free worlds instead of monitoring and controlling them. The work was slow and difficult, requiring not just technical expertise, but also careful negotiation between species with very different ideas about privacy and information sharing. On the former slave world of Kepler-7, Sarah Mitchell's Marines worked alongside Kelvani engineers to restore mining operations under worker control. The humans had brought advanced equipment that could extract resources without the environmental destruction that had characterized Commonwealth operations, but teaching alien workers to use the new technology required patience and creativity. Dr. Alex Rodriguez found himself in charge of the galaxy's largest humanitarian mission, coordinating medical aid for worlds where Commonwealth occupation had left populations suffering from malnutrition, disease, and psychological trauma. Human medical technology was more advanced than most species had ever seen, but treating alien physiology required careful research and experimentation. The political situation was complicated by the fact that not all Commonwealth species had been willing participants in the Empire. Many Catherian civilians had genuinely believed their government's propaganda about bringing civilization to primitive worlds. When they learned the truth about pacification zones and slave labor camps, some experienced psychological breakdowns that required medical treatment. Tyler Ross commanded human peacekeeping forces on 12 different worlds, where former Commonwealth officials were trying to maintain control through intimidation and violence. His ships provided support for local security forces, but the humans were careful to avoid becoming occupiers themselves. The goal was to help each world develop its own systems of government and law enforcement. The most difficult challenge was what to do with Commonwealth military forces that had surrendered. Many alien officers and soldiers claimed they had been following orders without understanding the true nature of their missions, while others had been willing participants in genocide and slavery. Human military tribunals worked with representatives from affected species to determine appropriate justice for war crimes while avoiding cycles of revenge that could destabilize the new government. Eric Stone had been placed in charge of monitoring Commonwealth holdouts who refused to surrender and continued to operate from hidden bases in remote star systems. Intelligence reports suggested that Admiral Kreshatar was attempting to organize a counter-revolutionary movement with support from species that had benefited from the old system. Nancy Cole found herself serving as humanity's chief diplomatic representative, traveling throughout the galaxy to negotiate agreements between species that had been enemies for generations. Her experiences making first contact with the Andrathi had prepared her for the delicate work of building trust between civilizations with very different cultures and histories. Ben Parker's intelligence network had expanded to include representatives from dozens of species, creating an early warning system that could detect threats to the new government before they became serious problems. The work required careful balance between security and the privacy rights that had been non-existent under Commonwealth rule. The transformation of the galaxy was not accomplished without setbacks and tragedies. On 17 worlds, Commonwealth loyalists attempted to destroy infrastructure rather than allow it to fall under democratic control. 3 human ships were lost to surprise attacks by Zilonian holdouts who used civilian vessels to hide their military operations. But for every tragedy, there were dozens of success stories. The Theran agricultural worlds had formed a cooperative that was producing more food than ever before while treating their workers with dignity and respect. The Morvani refugees who had survived the burning of their homeworld were working with human terraforming experts to restore their forest planets to their original beauty. Perhaps most importantly, the new galactic government was beginning to function as more than just a crisis response organization. Representatives from different species were learning to work together, finding common ground despite vast differences in biology, culture, and history. Trade agreements were being negotiated based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Research. Partnerships were developing that combined the knowledge and capabilities of multiple species. Amanda Carter had been appointed as the first director of Galactic Reconstruction, a position that required her to coordinate efforts across hundreds of worlds while balancing the needs of species with very different priorities and capabilities. Her daily briefings to Admiral Sullivan covered everything from food distribution problems to disputes over mining rights on formerly Commonwealth-controlled asteroids. The human fleet had been restructured into smaller task forces that could respond quickly to crises while avoiding the appearance of military occupation. Sullivan maintained overall command, but individual captains were given significant autonomy to make decisions based on local conditions and needs. Jake Morrison continued his reconnaissance work, but now his missions focused on gathering intelligence about potential external threats to the new galactic government. Reports from the edge of explored space suggested that other empires existed beyond Commonwealth territory, and some of them might view the collapse of the old order as an opportunity for expansion. As the first year of galactic freedom progressed, it became clear that the real test of the new government would not be military, but political. Could dozens of species with different cultures, values, and capabilities learn to share power peacefully? Could they build institutions strong enough to prevent the rise of new tyrants while flexible enough to accommodate the needs of vastly different civilizations? The humans had returned to find their galaxy enslaved, and they had succeeded in breaking the chains that bound it. But the work of building a better future had only just begun. 2 years after the fall of the Commonwealth, the galaxy was beginning to look like a very different place. Admiral Kate Sullivan walked through the corridors of New Haven Station, a massive space habitat that had been built in neutral space to serve as the permanent seat of the Galactic Federation. Representatives from 63 different species worked together in the station's council chambers, debating laws and policies that would affect trillions of beings across hundreds of star systems. The construction of New Haven had been a joint project involving the best engineers and architects from dozens of worlds. Human quantum technology provided the station's framework, while Andrathi bioengineering created living systems that maintained atmosphere and temperature. Cytherian crystal-growing techniques produced beautiful decorative elements, and Theron agricultural specialists designed food production systems that could feed the diverse dietary needs of the station's inhabitants. Sullivan paused at an observation deck to watch ships from across the galaxy docking at the station's ports. Sleek human vessels shared space with organic Andrathi bioships, crystalline Cytherian cruisers, and the angular metal craft preferred by the Kelvani. 2 years ago, many of these species had been bitter enemies. Now they worked together as equal partners in building a better future for everyone. Current Ryder had been elected as the first president of the Galactic Federation, a position that rotated every 3 years among representatives from different member species. His inauguration had been broadcast throughout the galaxy in hundreds of languages, and his speech about unity and diversity had inspired celebrations on thousands of worlds. The challenges facing the new government were still enormous, but progress was being made on multiple fronts. Marcus Bell's infrastructure reconstruction teams had successfully rebuilt communication networks that connected every member world while respecting each species' privacy and cultural values. The new networks used quantum encryption that made surveillance and censorship impossible, ensuring that no future government could control information the way the Commonwealth had. Dr. Alex Rodriguez had established the Galactic Medical Cooperative, an organization that shared medical knowledge and resources among all member species. Human genetic therapy techniques were being adapted to treat diseases that had plagued alien species for millennia, while alien biotechnology was helping humans overcome health problems they had developed during their long exile in space. The most successful aspect of the new galactic civilization was economic cooperation. Nancy Cole had negotiated trade agreements that allowed each world to specialize in what they did best while ensuring fair prices and working conditions for everyone involved. The Theron worlds produced food using sustainable agricultural techniques. The Kelvani operated mining cooperatives that extracted resources without environmental damage. Human industrial worlds manufactured advanced technology that was shared freely with all Federation members. Sarah Mitchell had established the Federation Peacekeeping Corps, a multi-species military organization dedicated to protecting member worlds from external threats and maintaining peace between different groups. Unlike the Commonwealth's oppressive military forces, the Peacekeeping Corps was strictly limited in its authority and accountable to elected civilian leaders. The transformation was not limited to politics and economics. Cultural exchange programs had been established that allowed young beings from different species to study and work on alien worlds. Human universities welcomed students from across the galaxy, while human scholars traveled to other worlds to learn about different approaches to science, art, and philosophy. Tyler Ross commanded the Federation's Border Patrol forces, which monitored the edges of known space for potential threats from unexplored regions. His ships had made contact with several previously unknown species, and diplomatic teams were working to establish peaceful relationships with these new civilizations. Intelligence reports from Ben Parker's networks had confirmed the existence of at least 3 major empires beyond Federation space. The hegemony controlled a large region of space beyond the galactic core, while the Combine dominated several spiral arms that had never been explored by Commonwealth forces. Most concerning were reports of something called the Swarm, a collection of machine intelligences that consumed entire star systems to fuel their expansion. But the Federation was not defenseless against these potential threats. Human military technology had been shared with allied species, creating a combined defense force more powerful than anything the Commonwealth had possessed. More importantly, the Federation's democratic structure and commitment to freedom made it attractive to oppressed peoples throughout the galaxy, creating a network of allies and sympathizers that extended far beyond official borders. Eric Stone had been promoted to Fleet Admiral and placed in charge of the Federation's exploration program. His ships were making contact with isolated worlds that had hidden from the Commonwealth for centuries, bringing them news of liberation and invitations to join the galactic community. Many of these worlds possessed unique knowledge and capabilities that strengthened the Federation as a whole. Amanda Carter continued her work as Director of Galactic Reconstruction, but her focus had shifted from emergency relief to long-term development. The Federation had established universities, research institutes, and cultural centers throughout the galaxy, creating institutions that would preserve knowledge and promote cooperation between species for generations to come. The success of the Federation had not gone unnoticed by the galaxy's former oppressors. Admiral Kreshatar and his Commonwealth loyalists had established a government in exile on the edge of Federation space, claiming to represent the legitimate authority of the old empire. Their forces were too weak to pose a serious military threat, but they conducted propaganda campaigns designed to undermine Federation unity and encourage rebellion by species that had benefited from Commonwealth rule. More dangerous were the criminal organizations that had emerged in the power vacuum left by the Commonwealth's collapse. Smugglers, slavers, and pirates operated from hidden bases in uncharted systems, preying on merchant ships and isolated colonies. The Federation Peacekeeping Corps worked constantly to track down these criminals, but the vast size of the galaxy made complete security impossible. Jake Morrison had been appointed as Director of Federation Intelligence, coordinating information gathering and analysis across all member worlds. His agents monitored potential threats, both internal and external, but they operated under strict legal constraints that prevented the surveillance abuses that had characterized Commonwealth intelligence operations. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the new galactic civilization was how quickly former enemies had learned to work together. Catherian engineers collaborated with human scientists on projects that neither species could have accomplished alone. Andrathi biotechnology was being combined with Kelvani metallurgy to create new materials with incredible properties. Even former Commonwealth military officers who had accepted Federation authority were contributing their knowledge to peacekeeping and exploration efforts. The transformation was visible everywhere Sullivan looked as she continued her tour of New Haven Station. In the diplomatic quarters, representatives from dozens of species worked together to resolve disputes peacefully. In the research laboratories, scientists from across the galaxy collaborated on projects that would benefit everyone. In the cultural centers, artists and musicians from different worlds created new forms of expression that combined the best of multiple traditions. But perhaps most importantly, in the schools and nurseries, young beings from many species played and learned together, growing up with the understanding that diversity was a source of strength rather than conflict. These children would inherit a galaxy very different from the one their parents had known. A galaxy where freedom and cooperation were more powerful than fear and oppression. The humans had returned to find their galaxy enslaved, and they had succeeded in breaking the chains that bound it. But their greatest achievement was not military victory or technological advancement. Their greatest achievement was proving that different species could work together as equals, building a civilization based on mutual respect and shared prosperity. 5 years had passed since the human fleet had materialized from the darkness to shatter the Commonwealth's iron grip on the galaxy, and Admiral Kate Sullivan found herself standing in a place she had never imagined she would see. The memorial garden on New Haven Station stretched for miles through the station's central core, a living monument to all the species and individuals who had suffered and died under Commonwealth oppression. Each section of the garden represented a different world or civilization, with plants and memorial stones chosen to honor the unique characteristics of the beings who had called those places home. The Morvani section grew with towering trees that sang in harmonious tones when the artificial wind moved through their leaves. The Kethri Memorial featured flowing water sculptures that created patterns of light and shadow on crystalline walls. Sullivan paused before a simple stone monument that bore the names of every human who had died during the 8 centuries of exile, from the original plague survivors who had fled Earth to the reconnaissance teams who had given their lives gathering intelligence about the Commonwealth. The inscription was written in both ancient English and the modern Galactic Standard that had become the common language of the Federation. They traveled into darkness so that others might live in light, Sullivan read aloud, her voice carrying across the quiet garden. Behind her, Current Rider approached with the careful movements that indicated respect in Andrathi culture. The Federation President's bioluminescent patterns glowed softly with colors that conveyed both sadness and hope. "The memorial is beautiful," Current Rider said, settling beside Sullivan on a bench carved from stone that had come from dozens of different worlds. "But I sometimes wonder if future generations will understand the price that was paid for their freedom." Sullivan smiled as she watched a group of young beings from 6 different species playing together near a fountain that combined human water recycling technology with Andrathi bioluminescent organisms. The children's laughter echoed through the garden in musical tones that no single species could have created alone. "They will understand," she replied. "Not because we tell them stories about the old days, but because they will live in a galaxy where such stories are impossible to imagine." The transformation of galactic civilization had exceeded even the most optimistic projections of the original liberation planners. The Galactic Federation now included over 200 member worlds, with new species joining every month as exploration ships made contact with civilizations that had hidden from the Commonwealth for centuries. Marcus Bell had been elected as the Federation's Minister of Technology, overseeing research and development programs that combine the knowledge and capabilities of dozens of species. The technological advances achieved through cooperation had surpassed anything the Commonwealth had accomplished through coercion and exploitation. The quantum communication networks that connected Federation worlds operated faster than light and could not be intercepted or censored by any known technology. Medical advances had eliminated diseases that had plagued multiple species for millennia. Agricultural techniques developed through interspecies cooperation had ended hunger on hundreds of worlds. Dr. Alex Rodriguez now served as director of the Galactic Health Organization, coordinating medical research and emergency response across the entire Federation. His teams had developed treatments for genetic disorders that affected 17 different species, using techniques that combined human genetic therapy with alien biotechnology. The military situation had stabilized as well. Admiral Crescitar's Commonwealth in exile had finally collapsed when most of its member species chose to join the Federation instead of continuing their feudal resistance. The remnants had retreated to the edge of known space, where they posed no serious threat to Federation security. More encouraging was the peaceful contact that had been established with two of the external empires that had initially been seen as potential threats. The hegemony had proven to be a democratic confederation, not unlike the Federation itself, and formal diplomatic relations had been established. The Combine remained neutral, but had agreed to non-aggression pacts that prevented conflicts over border regions. Only the Swarm continued to pose a serious external threat, but Federation intelligence suggested that the Machine Collective was focused on expansion into unexplored regions rather than conflict with organic civilizations. Long-range monitoring stations watched for any signs of swarm movement toward Federation space, but no hostile actions had been detected. Sarah Mitchell had established the Federation Military Academy on a world that had been chosen specifically for its educational value. The planet featured diverse environments that could train officers to operate in conditions found throughout the galaxy, while its location in neutral space emphasized the Federation's commitment to defending all member worlds equally. Tyler Ross commanded the Federation's deep space exploration fleets, leading missions that pushed the boundaries of known space further each year. His ships had discovered 17 previously unknown civilizations, most of which had chosen to join the Federation after learning about its principles and achievements. The cultural development of the Federation was perhaps even more remarkable than its political and technological progress. Nancy Cole had established the Galactic Cultural Exchange, an organization that promoted artistic and intellectual cooperation between species. Federation universities offered courses taught by scholars from dozens of worlds, while artist colonies brought together creative beings from across the galaxy. The Federation's legal system had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history. Instead of imposing uniform laws on all member worlds, the Federation had developed a framework that allowed each species to maintain their own cultural and legal traditions while establishing common standards for interspecies relations and trade. Ben Parker's intelligence services had been restructured as the Federation Information Service, an organization dedicated to gathering and sharing knowledge rather than conducting surveillance and espionage. The FIS operated under strict oversight from elected officials and citizen review boards, ensuring that the mistakes of the Commonwealth's oppressive intelligence apparatus could never be repeated. Eric Stone had been promoted to Supreme Commander of Federation forces, overseeing military operations throughout the galaxy. His primary responsibility was not conquest or oppression, but the protection of Federation citizens and the defense of democratic values against any threat that might emerge. Amanda Carter continued her work as Director of Galactic Reconstruction, but her focus had shifted to helping newly discovered civilizations integrate into the Federation while maintaining their unique characteristics and traditions. Her teams had developed protocols that allowed new member worlds to adopt Federation technology and practices at their own pace. Jake Morrison had retired from active intelligence work to become the Federation's official historian, documenting the experiences of liberation and reconstruction for future generations. His archives included not just military and political records, but also personal stories from beings throughout the galaxy who had lived through the transformation from oppression to freedom. As Sullivan continued her walk through the memorial garden, she reflected on the journey that had brought humanity and its allies to this point. The humans had fled Earth as refugees, spending centuries in exile while the galaxy fell under tyrannical rule. They had returned as liberators, But their greatest victory had not been military conquest. Their greatest victory had been proving that intelligent species could choose cooperation over conflict, freedom over security, and hope over fear. The galaxy had been ruled by tyrants for 1,000 years, but it now belonged to everyone who called it home. The children playing in the Memorial Garden would grow up in a galaxy where such concepts as slave worlds, pacification zones, and genocidal empires were historical curiosities rather than present dangers. They would inherit not just freedom, but the knowledge and tools necessary to preserve that freedom for their own descendants. Sullivan's communication device chimed softly, alerting her to an incoming message from the Federation Council. A new species had been discovered in the Outer Rim territories, and they were requesting assistance in establishing contact with the galactic community. It was exactly the kind of situation that had once filled her with apprehension, but now brought only excitement about the possibilities ahead. As she prepared to leave the Memorial Garden and return to her duties, Sullivan paused for one last look at the monument to human sacrifice and alien suffering. The inscription remained true. They had traveled into darkness so that others might live in light. But now the darkness was ending, and the light of freedom shone across the entire galaxy. The stars belonged to everyone, and humanity had helped make sure it would stay that way forever.